Does anybody have any idea? Did you have a look at what it might be at all? What is the page object model, which is also called a POM? And what are hooks? Can everybody see my screen? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so
Yes.
Basically, I've just highlighted that a page object, which is also known as a POM, is a design pattern in Selenium, which is what we're using, that creates an object repository for storing all web elements. And we all know what a web element is. A web element is the same thing as a locator, which is how you find, the elements in your web page. And the reason why this has become very paramount is being used, I think all companies use it right now, to be honest, is because they feel that it reduces code duplication and improve test case maintenance in your page object. Also, another explanation here, you can see it says, how do you explain page object model in interviews? These are questions that are really asked as well with regards to it. And you can even see in Indeed here, there are 34 different interview questions surrounding this page object that we'll be dealing with today. So that's what a page object is, and that's why a page object is majorly used in all companies right now. So now we're going to go into our framework, and this is exactly where everybody should be at right now. From the last video you all had, this is your current setup. That's how your setup should look like at the moment. So basically, what are we doing with regards to a page object? All these codes, all these methods that has been written, I'm highlighting them. Basically, they're saying, we don't want this way because it duplicates code. We're repeating the codes all the time. We want to have it in a particular directory or file whereby these are all stored. So if we want to make any changes, we know to go to that particular folder or directory and make the changes. So that's basically why we've got the page objects. And then what are hooks? So hooks are basically, I'll give you a scenario of this. So when you call your application or your website or your URL that you're trying to link into, most of the time your hook has stored there. Some companies will call them bays. Some companies will call them hooks. Majorly, I've heard of bays now, not as much as hooks anymore, but they are the same thing. They are just storing, instead of we having to have it under the class for step definition, you have all these sort of informations stored under your hooks. So that is what your hook is and what your page object model is. Hooks, apart from your URL, you can also have like your weights. In the last class, I was showing someone how to write the implicit weight. For example, if, let's say, the first name was failing because of a weight, that means that we have to repeatedly write that method or that code in all of these lines. Let's assume that we need, all of them are failing because of a weight. You can see how much duplication you would have had to write because of that. So that's why hooks has also been created. They are trying as much as possible to minimize the numbers of code duplications on there. And due to that explanation, does anybody have any questions? Because I'm going to go right into how to create your hooks now. Any questions for me? Okay, no. So for you to write
Hi,
your...
Oyin, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello? I just wanted to ask a question regarding the page object model. Do we have any other design pattern apart from page object model, or is that the only one that we have?
That's the only one that, so far, for all the companies I've worked with so far, everybody uses page object model.
Right, okay. Thank you.
No matter the framework you're using, like with us now, we're using IntelliJ. Even if you go to a company and they're using Eclipse, they will still use a page object model. Even if you were using, at least I know of Java as well as C#, they all use page object model on their framework. Okay. Those two I know about definitely. Even on JavaScript as well, yeah, we did use page object model as well on the JavaScript. So yeah. Okay. So to set up the base or the hooks, under SRC mains Java, you right click, new, and then you click on package. I'm going to be using base now because that's majorly what I've seen, but you could use hooks in case you go to another company and they're using hook. They're the same thing, okay? Okay, once that has been created, then you right click on the newly created directory, new, and then it is a Java class that you're going to be setting up. And so we want to call it a base page. So now we have a public class. Does anybody have an idea what a public class is? I'm sure we all have an understanding of what a public is. Public means you're in a public environment. But because we're on a framework, when we say it's public, that means that this particular method I've written, I can call it in any of my classes. So I can reuse this particular method in any class that I create. That's basically what a public class means. Sometimes on your board, you might see what is called a private class. That means you can only use it on that particular class. You can't, it cannot be integrated, or you cannot use it on any other class. For instance, I've just clicked on step definition. You won't be able to use this base page in a step definition class if it was private. Okay, so that is the difference between a public class and a private class. I'm mentioning all this, you might be asked in interviews. Okay, so now we've got a public class and we have got the name, which is the method. Now we want to integrate it with our WebDriver. And we're going to be using a constructor as well. Basically, a constructor is a special type of method whereby we're using the same naming format. That is what a constructor is. So in line 5, where we have public class, we're going to be creating a constructor for this. And basically what that means is public and base. So the name of the method you've just called as well is what is called the constructor. And we're going to be calling our WebDriver in there. And we'll be calling this as this driver equals to driver. So we've written our code for that. Now what we want to do is we're going to be calling our URL. We're going to be moving it into our base class. So now we're going to be writing the method, which is our public. And the reason I'm using public a lot is because I'm going to be calling it in another class. When I say another class, if you notice, anywhere you've got a C, those are, when you were setting up, they were all classes. So that is another class. And if you also notice as well, they are public classes, which means we're going to be reusing these strings in other classes. So this will be public void. So I'm going to be giving it a name. You can call it any name as far as it makes a lot of sense to you or to anybody else that is going to be looking at what you're trying to do. So at the moment, what we're trying to do is we're trying to go into a particular URL. That's what we're trying to do. You can say navigate. You can say go to. As far as something that has to be understood when someone looks at this code. Okay, so I'll use go to URL. So I'll string my URL. So I'll go to the step definition. I need this URL. I'll go back to my base class and I'll paste this string in here. Then we have driver dots. We need this particular. Because I've stringed my URL, I'll just type it. So this, in line 13, this URL that I've highlighted, I'm saying I want to use this URL. And I'm just calling this to say get the driver.get the URL. If you notice on the step definition, what we have done here is we've passed exactly the driver.get and then we've entered that URL itself. So that's basically what we've done here. In the base, I have changed it up a bit. A lot of the time in companies, so let me explain the reason why as well. A lot of the time in companies, when you have naming formats, like you have like the URL, you have a particular data, let's say your first name, your last name, a lot of the time they'll pass it as a string. They don't like to copy, just like the page object. They feel that these are not neat way with regards to your framework. So they like as much as possible not to call them repeatedly a lot of time. Like for instance, if we're doing a scenario outline, if you had a lot of names to use, you have to keep repeating people's name all over your project. So once it's stored into a particular class, all you just need to do is write it as a string and then call the string name. So eventually when I'm going to call it, I'm going to be using this go to URL. I would not be using the person's name. you'll see that in a short while. So now that I've done the URL, what I then want to do now is I want to set up my page object so that we can then use this base line to be able for it to be able to work in my page object. And for me to do that, we're still going to be in Java. Right click, new, package, and now we have page objects. And then I right click again, and it's going to be a class. Click class. Now I want my naming convention based on what exactly I'm going to be working on, or I'm testing, or the functionality I'm working on. At the moment, we're all working on registration. So I'm going to be using the same naming convention. So that will be registration page. Click enter. Now I have another, you'll notice, I have another public class here. Because reason being, I need this particular URL, this method I've written here. I'm going to need it in my step definition. So I want it to be, I'm going to be wanting it to be able to pull to my step definition, as well as I'm going to be integrating it as well to my page objects. So there are three different classes that are going to be interlinking with each other. They're going to be working together. So we need it to be public so that it can reflect. We can see it, then we'll be able to use it. So I'll go back to my page object. Now I'm going to be writing another code. I'm also going to be writing a constructor for this. But the first thing I want to do, like I said, I want to call this base page in my registration. So in my line 3, I'll write extends. And what do I want to extend? I want to extend it to this base page so that I can see anything I've got written here in that particular class. So base. You can see it's throwing an error. Reason being is I haven't completed my code. So I'll continue with that. And what do I also want? I want my WebDriver as well. Then I'm also creating my constructor, which is public. And the name of my page object. And also, I want to call the web drivers in there. So now that I've done that, you can see that the first line, line 6, I do not have any error, but now I have an error in line 9, underlined. Same reason I've not finished writing my code. That's basically why it's showing the error. Okay, this is probably something that is really new. The reason why we're using a super as the name is, your base is the main class here. And we need to call anything in this class into our step definition. So we're using the super driver. We have a driver here. We're calling it as well in our step definition. So that's why we've gotten this code written. And then we also need to have this driver. Equals to driver. If you notice, if I flick in from here, from this class, and you look at this code, and I go to my base page as well, you notice that they're very, very similar, which is why in automation, a lot of your codes are repetitive. You just need to know where to actually write it. Then I'll conclude because I want to call this first. So let me go back here. And what do we want to do? It's going to be public void. And what happens to the URL? We want to open that URL once we get to the URL. So I'm writing my methods for it. Now we want to call this particular go to URL. So I'll copy this. I'll go to my page. So if I go back to this base page, you can see here, it says one usage. If I click on it, it goes to my page object that I'm using this at the moment. If you look here, you see that this does not have any usage. It says no usage. Why? Because now, as much as I've linked my page object to my base page, I now need to link my page object to my step definition page, which means that this line 23, I'm going to be changing it to a page object model so that I can then call from here to this step definition. And for me to be able to do that, once I click on the class for the page object, then I need to start writing some methods as well there. So the first thing I want to do is public. Then I need this naming convention here, which is my registration page. Go back to your step definition. I need to import this. You can see it's giving me the option, Alt Enter or Import Class. Once I click on this import, at the top, you can see that it's imported the page object onto this particular class for me. So right after your constructor here, and under your Chrome driver, so we're going to the next line, I want to call this method I've written. This particular string, I want to call this. You can see that this is grayed out, whereby this is highlighted. So I'm going to be calling this one say equals to new, and you can see it's giving up the option here. Basically, it's calling this particular string that has been written here. That's basically what it's called here. And we want to have our driver as well. So now that I've done that format, What I then want to do is I want to use this particular, so I'll slash this out. You can see that once I clicked on the dot, it gave me that option for the go to URL. This is what I have used in my page object. And you can see that it's highlighted for me there. If I go back here, everything has highlighted. Nothing is grayed out anymore on this page. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run this so that you can see that it has actually worked. I might have to share another screen because it shows on another screen. So are you able to see the Chrome, automated Chrome driver? Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, can you see the automated Chrome driver that I've just moved onto the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So you can see that this navigated to that same URL. So which means that what I've just done here on the page object works. Now that that has worked, what we then want to then do is on the other functionalities that we have on the features that we've tested that all of you should have on your screen, which are all these steps now. We're now going to move them as well into our page objects. And for us to be able to do that, all we just need to do is we'll write. So we're going to write in different methods now continuously, but they're very similar to themselves. So we say by, and its first name. Say first name. So we're going to be using a camel case, writing. I'm using CSS. I know a lot of you are using Experts. I'll show you how I write my CSS method in a bit. So this is the method I'm going to be using. I'll finish it up in a short while, but I'll just navigate to that URL, and then I'll show you how to actually write your own CSS selector on that same web page. So let me minimize this. Let me go here. Okay, so we right click, inspect element. So now we've got ID, which is this. We've got name as well. So if I'm writing a CSS selector myself, instead of right-clicking, because I know there's a CSS selector here, instead of right-clicking and copying that CSS selector, which will give us this information, you can see this is what we have. I would do the same thing. So this has already given us that anyway, so I'm not going to do the same thing because I already have it here, but I'll show you. In case you have a very long CSS selector, all you just need to do is add the hash, or you have multiple So for instance, if we take this off, you see that we have 1 of 6. So all you just need to do to make a 1 of 1 is put that hash instead of going to right click and getting the CSS selector. So that's giving me 1 of 1. So that's what I want to use. I'll copy that. I'll paste it here. And then I'll continue writing. I'll finish up my method with my public class, public void. What do I want to name it? I want to say enter first name. And yes, there was something else I did a bit of change because we have different ways in which we can actually also write the first name. You can call a string. So let me go to my feature files. So if you notice here, I've said, and I enter first name as Oin here. This is a string. If I go to my step definition here, you see that it's showing as, that's in line 30. Yeah, well, I like that. It's already showing me that this is a string. So I need to call that string. So I've written string and first name. And if you notice in my send keys, I haven't entered my name. Instead, I've called the string I've written in line 31. I've called it in here. So what I'm going to need to do in my page object as well, I'm going to use that same format of what I've just done in my step definition. So I'm going to enter it as a string here, and then come down here and I'll say, so we're going to use technically sort of like this format. So let me just copy this. To here, but then I'm going to take this off. So I'm just going to call this first name that I've written there when I was writing for my elements. So I'm going to call that, and I'm going to call that, paste it in here. Oh, I know what's happening. I've used the same sort of formatting name. So let me just make a few changes so that it doesn't flash. And as you can see, it's not showing me an error message. The reason it was showing an error message before was because I used the same camel case for both my string and for my element. So I have to go back to my step definition as well, and then change that string to have the same naming convention with my page object. I'll slash this out. Then what I now want to do is I want to call that registration page, and then I'm going to call it, yeah, so registration page dot. Once I click on the dot, it will give me my option. You can see the first name that I've used there, and then it's asking for that string. That's why it's still showing an error. Once I enter that string in there, it wouldn't show an error message anymore. So that's basically what we have to do for the page object, your base, which is also your hooks, and your step definition. So the three of them will be interlinking together. So that's basically what we have. Yeah. If I run it again now, once it spins up, I'll move it to your side so that you can see that it actually also worked. And as you can see, my first name is still displayed on there. So I'm going to also touch on how to not repeatedly write a weight, and I'm going to call that in the base page as well. So I would write the method, and I'll say public let me do that so I can show you another way to create a class as well. So public void. So let me call this weight loading. And I'll say new weight. Alpha. Alpha. So as you can see in line 18, this wait for helper is screaming. You can see the red line, the red, that I haven't done something here. I need to do something. That's basically what it's telling me. And what do I need to do? Once I click on this red, the very first option says create class for wait for helper. So I need to create a class as well for this. So what I'll do, so basically creating this class is basically what I did when I was creating this page objects. And you see, instead of having to right click, add class, it would automatically create it for me now. And I'll do that so you can see what it's talking about. I'll click on that. And where is it telling me? Saying, I'm going to put it under this base package. And this is the directory for you. I'll click OK. And as you can see, I've got it under this page as wait for helpers. And it set up everything I would normally, waste time doing myself here, writing the name, everything. It's done everything in one go for me. All I just need to do is make a bit of, changes so that is then I'm able to use it. As you can see in my base page, even though this is no longer red, this has then gone to red. Because why? I need to be able to call this implicit wait for my wait helper, and I haven't set up my method for it yet. So I'm going to do that so that I don't have this red screaming at me anymore. So I'll go here. And like I said, there's a lot of copy and paste. So the first thing I'm going to do is, so we've got the public. Oh, yeah. And another good thing, I kept talking about constructor. This created a constructor for us, if you notice. We've got the public class, and he also created the constructor, which is the repetitive name base for us to use. going to have my WebDriver. And it's going to be public as well. And then install this, and I need this driver as well. Yeah. So, okay. And then we'll now want to write a method for this implicit. Go back here. It will be public. And by now we all understand why we're using public, because we want it to reflect in another class. We want to be able to use this weight for helper in another class. So I've called the name here as implicit. So let me just copy this. That's it. Now we have driver dot manage dot timeout dot implicit weight. And I think the last time we used 3 seconds. You can increase it if need be. So timeout, minutes and seconds. And then. So for the assertion that was given an issue the last time, all you need to do is you go to your step definition. So if I go to base, don't forget I've called my base in my step definition. I called my base, I extended this in my step definition. So all I need to do, once you get to your assertion as well, you just need to, just above that, you just need to call, actually, let me go back here. So we've used in the base. So in the base, we've used waiting loading. So we then go back to our page, and at the top there, you just paste that. And what that would do is that would wait 3 seconds before he enters the first name. I'll run it so you can see it as well, that worked. And as you can see, that took a while for that to go enter into it. So that is basically what we need to do with regards to the page object model, as well as your hooks. And also, I've also covered for your weights. If there's any particular method you want to write, you can write it into your weight because you've also called it into your base. So once you write anything in your weight, don't forget to write another method to be able to call that method from your weight into your base before you can call it into your class for the page objects. So that's how they all interlink with each other. And then once you've done that, then you then need to call that particular method in your step definition. So I did a string earlier on here. So I'm going to cover, I think, let me see. because I'm going to, the remaining part of it, you're going to be doing it yourselves. Because, you know, practice makes perfect, and me showing you everything on what needs to be done. Yeah, so we've covered how you can use a string. I know you guys know how to write the string itself without having to call it. So that's why I've covered this, so that you can call from a string directly from your feature files. Yeah, that's it for today. Any questions?
We are going to start the induction in 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So that's where we're going to be stopping this class. You have an induction, but we're finished anyway, so we're fine.